It's the Boris Dirk podcast, the only NBA podcast that doesn't want to talk about the new crowned champions, the Boston Celtics. But we haven't potted since they sealed the deal. I've got a new mic though, so this pod's probably sounding pretty crispy. Today we're going to talk the finals, the end of the 23-24 season, and then, more importantly, a really juicy trade. Alex Caruso to the Thunder for Josh Giddey. The Chicago Bulls, I saw someone on Twitter say they continue to be the Applebee's of the NBA. But it's a really interesting trade, and I'm excited to talk about it. Max, how are you?
I am doing pretty well. I'm recovering from the really disappointing finals, honestly. Like that's one of the less electric finals series that we've had. I mean, both this year and last year were not super competitive 5-game series, but at least I don't know. I wasn't rooting against the finalists last year. We deserve a matchup of Titans in the finals one of these years. Whether it's Luka Giannis or Jokic Giannis or Nuggets Celtics. Just something that feels like could give us a sort of all-time series, which I was hopeful this one would do, but the Celtics proved too overwhelming.
Yep. And I want to get something out of the way. This Celtics team did not win the title because of the Vorps and the Schnorps and the three-point attempts. They were the most connected team. They were the most balanced team. Their ball movement was beautiful. And that's what took them over the edge. And besides the fact that you're a New York basketball fan and I live in New York, there are a lot of reasons that we ended up being Boston Celtics haters. A lot of it is just Bill Simmons' fault. And by the way, I don't think Bill Simmons speaks for a lot of Boston. And also, Bill, if you ever listen to this, give us a job at the Ringer, and we'll never say anything mean about you again. For now, though, we're punching up. The Boston sports mafia is nauseating. But there's no denying this was an incredible Boston team.
Yeah.
And with very few weak links. And the NBA is moving in a direction that highly favors a 5-out look. And nobody had a better 5-out look this year than the Boston Celtics. The ball didn't stick in Tatum's hands like it has in past years. They succumbed to some really poor offensive runs, but nothing backbreaking. They were the best team in the league all year, and they are champions for a reason. And Brad Stevens, take a bow.
Yeah.
Because we can go through the list of transactions that culminated in this ridiculous 5, 6, 7 guys.
Yeah.
I mean, the dude, gets promoted by demotion and just turns out to be maybe the best executive in the league.
It's kind of the reverse. This just came to me. It's kind of the reverse Steve Kerr, where like Steve Kerr went from kind of like a decent front office executive who was like decently respected, but like not, an all-timer, and then goes to the Warriors and becomes a legendary coach. It's kind of Brad Stevens, who was like everyone recognized he was a good basketball coach, but he didn't have that sort of stature. And now he goes up to the front office and puts together this ridiculous team. I mean, they have 5 all-star caliber players starting with Al Horford, a former multi-time all-star coming off the bench. I thought that their depth past Al Horford would be an issue this year, but Pritchard stepped up. Hauser really stepped up, and they traded for Xavier Tillman. That helped bolster their depth too. And yeah, they're a super deep team, as we've covered. They just have so many ways of punishing you offensively, and as soon as you try to double, it's just inevitable you're going to have to help against their drives because their spacing is just so like court warping that you help, you get in rotation, they start driving, you start helping, and they have an open three. And they knock them down with like 5 semi around 40% shooters at such a high clip. And the thing about this finals is they didn't even really shoot that well. Like they had a lot of open threes and were below their season average in pretty much every game of this series, maybe every game of this series. And their offensive numbers weren't like crazy as a result, but their defense was just so good because they're so versatile, so long collectively, and with the added rim protection presence when Kristaps was able to play, they're just such a juggernaut. And they don't have that like MVP level player at the top of it, but They just are so deep, so well balanced, and their process has become really good on both offense and defense.
But none of their best guys are ever liabilities on defense,
Hmm.
and that really matters. I think it was Joe Mazzulla who said self-awareness was this team's greatest asset, and I thought that was a really astute observation because all the way down the line, like look at a guy like Sam Hauser who knows not to dribble. He knows his job is to guard on an island when he's asked to do it and make threes. And
Yep.
boy, did he make some big threes in these playoffs. Derek White just back-breaking three after back-breaking three in this series. Unbelievable trade for them. I always liked Spurs Derek White. I didn't know that he was going to become maybe my favorite player in the league to watch.
Yeah.
Um, Unbelievable. He averaged 1.2 blocks during the regular season this year. So when he made a couple incredibly memorable blocks in the playoffs, that was no fluke. I mean, Pritchard deciding that he's going to check himself into games as the designated heaver, Al Horford understanding his role. I don't forget the Boston fans who quit on Al Horford said, really? We're running it back with Al Horford? How old is he now? 74? But that dude, I mean, first off, he looks amazing. And I'm not just talking
Yeah.
about physique. He's just a beautiful man. But Tatum passing like we've never seen Tatum pass, especially in the last couple of games of this series. Sidebar, I don't care what anyone says. Tatum was going for finals MVP in the last few minutes
Oh
of the
yeah,
closing game.
for sure.
He was driving. They were up 30 and he was trying to score like nobody else on the Celtics. It would have been interesting if he stole it at the end. He's the gravity guy. He will always be the number one gravity guy on that team.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when Jimmy won it in I think it was the conference finals MVP, and everyone was saying Caleb Martin deserved that trophy. I'm always open to the argument that like the most highly regarded gravity guy on the team deserves it, even when his shooting's a little bit um, below his typical averages.
Yeah.
Tatum showed up when it mattered most, and he's one of the easiest guys in the league to build around. Even if he's not a top of the line MVP candidate, very few guys who you can build a roster around with more flexibility than Jason Tatum.
Yeah. And I mean, to touch on the shooting numbers again, for the series, Jalen, Jason Tatum, and Kristaps all shot basically 25% or lower from three. Like none of them were sniping. So that just goes to show this Celtics team has an even higher ceiling than what they showed in the finals, because Kristaps didn't play for the last three games, and or he played in the last one but was pretty obviously hurt. And they can shoot a hell of a lot better than they did in this series. So whoever is trying to knock him off next year is likely going to have to contend with a better version, or a better playing version of the Celtics team than what was in the finals. But yeah, I mean, the Derek White trade, they gave up a 2022 first round pick that became Blake Wesley and Josh Richardson, and then there's like a pick swap down the line, but really nothing that has been of consequence to the Spurs in return for Derek White. And then for Kristaps, they traded Marcus Smart and ended up with Kristaps and two first round picks, I believe, or at least one first round pick, which is, I mean, at the time, there were reasonable arguments to be made of why Marcus Smart might be the more valuable asset than Kristaps, but the fact that they got two first round picks on top of it is just insane.
But we got to remember the Smart trade or the Porzingis trade happened 4 months before the Drew trade.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, I was like, one, I don't expect Porzingis to be healthy in June. I just don't trust the injury track record. And this was also before my epiphany that I need to just start betting on the unicorns a little bit more. That sometimes, 7-2 rim protectors with supreme mobility and shooting chops, you just hope they're going to be healthy, because the ceiling is just so vastly more important than a guy like Marcus Smart. 4 months later, they get a middle linebacker with all the toughness and more offensive composure, more self-awareness in Drew Holiday. I still think everyone who said, like, give Marcus Smart some props for helping to build that culture is right, because Marcus Smart is a dog. But I was wrong when I said they shouldn't have traded him for Porzingis. And even if they didn't get Drew, I was wrong. Porzingis was a huge part of what took them to another level this year.
Yeah. And I mean, it was a totally dominant playoff run. They never got to a game six. They beat Miami in 5 with on the bad end of you know, historically fluky hot
Oh
shooting
yeah, I mean
performance from Miami.
They didn't prove anything to get to the finals. But what they
Yeah,
did against Dallas, I don't care. Luca's hobbled. What they did to Dallas, what they did to Kyrie, the way that they made Lively look like a rookie in a way that no other team could,
yeah,
all of that stuff was real. And if this was a team, if this was a Celtics team that went like 48-34 before getting the easiest, 3 rounds into the finals, and then they do this to Dallas, we could have a conversation.
yeah.
But the sustained dominance, the large sample size, that this is real. And I just want to say, I never quit on Brad Stevens, the coach. If Brad Stevens wanted to coach again,
Oh yeah,
Portland, go get him, please.
he always
Brad,
overachieved.
Brad Stevens Butler teams are probably the first domino that led me to having an NBA podcast with my dear friend here. The Butler teams blew my mind with Shelvin Mack and Gordon Hayward. The Celtics team had an all-in approach that was a little bit reminiscent of those back-to-back national championship game teams.
Yeah. And I mean, there are probably some teams out there in the playoffs who could have gotten them to a game 6. Like, I think it just proved that they were such a bad matchup for Dallas, like right away. They could, I didn't think Jaylen Brown would be strong enough to sort of make Luka work in the way that, similarly in the way that Jaden McDaniels was not strong enough to make Luka really work. But Jaylen held up really well in guarding him. And the Celtics as a team had a really good scheme. They knew who to help off of. They were daring PJ Washington, Derek Jones, Josh Green, Dante Exum, Kleba, all those guys to make threes, especially above the break threes. And those guys just couldn't hit him at a consistent enough rate to punish the defense. And as a result, they took away the pick and roll game. They took away the lobs to the basket because everyone was just condensed in the paint. They had 2 of the, 5 best guard defenders in the league, and White and Holiday, just hounding Kyrie and making every single moment of the series for him outside of like game 4 where he was good, just a living hell. And yeah, going forward, to beat them, you're going to need to have both the sort of apex dominant, superstar like you had in Luka, but then also have the supporting cast so that you're not so easily like schemable. So Denver, I think, is the team I'd most like to see play Boston. I also think that there's some teams in the East that could match up with them a little bit better than Dallas did, but still, this was the best team all year. And they just rolled through the playoffs, and they're going to enter next season as the heavy favorite, partially because of the lack of strength of the East, but also because they deserve it and are a really, really good team.
They have the 30th pick in the draft this year, too.
Mm-hmm.
Expect them to take a guy that can slot in right away. I think this draft has been rightfully labeled weak at the top, but I think there are a lot of guys in that 20 to 40 range that can help good teams right away. So the Celtics aren't done building. I mean, they could be even better next year. What an unbelievable bounce back from Jaylen Brown. The subject of so many memes last year. Can't dribble with his left. Ball security is an issue. He comes back this year and asserts his dominance against a couple of the best defenses in the NBA while guarding Luka more than any other Celtic. You saw the mutual respect from Luka as well after it was over. Luka
Yeah.
saying, "I love you, bro." I didn't know they had a relationship like that, but I think
Yeah,
when
me
you go
neither.
to war like this for 2 weeks, that's kind of a bond you share for life, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
But just so damn impressive. The shot maker that Jaylen Brown has developed into in terms of draft stuff, like this is why teams will continue to swing on really toolsy wings who play incredibly hard. If you watch the Jaylen Brown Cal tape, it's fascinating. Like his shot looks completely different. He overhauled his shooting mechanics as a pro. He has a weird set shot. He barely gets elevation on it, which is funny because now I feel like he rises to a point that very few defenders can stay in front of him and reach the
Yeah.
ball when he really wants to shoot it over you. He was a lot like a guy like Ron Holland, just running and dunking, getting the most out of his tools, finishing in transition, but an absolute half court mess. And the Celtics that year, what many interpreted as a reach and took him at number 3. and said, we just believe this guy's really smart. I'm sure they'd done some intel and really bought into the person because he's obviously an incredible worker and a really smart dude. It paid off. And then they got Tatum the next year. Drafting all NBA caliber two-way wings in back-to-back years is got to be one of the best 2-year back-to-back draft runs that any team has had in a long time.
Yeah. And with both the Lakers and Sixers taking worse guys ahead of them at first and second in both of those years as well. Yeah, there's a lot of thinking about how Lonzo and Brandon Ingram could have been Tatum and Brown, and also Fultz and Simmons more glaringly could have been Tatum and Brown. Phoenix also had the number 4 pick both those years as well, so they missed out on Tatum and Brown by 1 pick.
Josh Jackson and Dragon Bender. I mean, give the Lakers some credit. Brandon Ingram's skills have translated to the NBA.
They got real guys.
Lonzo Ball is awesome. His knees have completely stunted his career. I hope he gets another chance to be the player he can be.
And they basically got Anthony Davis with those 2 draft picks as well, because Lonzo and Ingram were, enticing enough assets they could combine it with all the other stuff they did to get Anthony. So
yeah. And even the D'Angelo Russell pick, I'm not going to knock the Lakers draft track record from the last decade. They've made a lot of great picks that allowed them, like you said, to produce the package that got them AD.
Speaking of great former Lakers, Alex Caruso was traded today for Josh Giddey, straight up. One of the earlier trades I can remember happening as far as like proximity to the finals. I guess they keep moving like the rest of the year up. But yeah, I can speak to it more from a Caruso angle, because I love Alex Caruso. I think he's one of the best role players in the NBA, probably the best guard defender in the NBA. Like, we're talking about that top 5 with White and Drew. Alex Caruso is definitely in that group, and maybe at the top of it with his ability to basically be able to guard wings as well, which sometimes you see other guard defenders struggle with. But first of all, you have to start with their lineup is just nasty defensively and so switchable. They've got Shea, who, maybe struggles on the ball at times, but off the ball is just an absolute steals and blocks maven, and is really solid positionally. You've got Alex Caruso, who might be the best guard defender in the league. Lou Dort, defensive stalwart. J-Dub, really good defender. And Chet Holmgren, who's got all defense upside. It's just a dominant, switchable defensive front for a team that already had a top 5 defense this past year and just exchanged their weakest link defensively for one of the strongest ones in the entire league.
The Celtics just showed us, like, you can't have enough crafty, high IQ perimeter defenders who compete at an all-world level. And we know Caruso can do that. When we were talking 5 out and kind of the modern championship formula, if you don't have a Jokic or a Luka, my first thought was, outside of the Celtics, the Thunder are building that foundation. They were kind of baby Celtics of the West a little bit this year. Caruso's going to be fucking awesome. Everyone who loves basketball loves Alex Caruso. It does feel like you're selling a little bit low on Giddey. Selling low, though, is not the same as overpaying, as my Thunder friend Micah reminded me today. He's such a homer, but he's right. I think about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I'm trying to remember the Giddey stock value trajectory, but I think about a year ago, you probably could have traded Giddey for not only Caruso, but maybe Patrick Williams, maybe Dalen Terry, my favorite player in the league. But the Thunder already have too many guys, so maybe that's irrelevant. And Caruso's the type of guy who's going to stay in crazy shape, a la Pat Bev, and probably be really good until he's 36. So I don't, he's had a couple injuries. He's 30. I don't care. He's going to be awesome. He's going to show up till the wheels come off. Cason Wallace might be better than Alex Caruso in 2 years. Just a thought. But again, you can't have too many of these guys. You just can't. I saw a Thunder fan on X. I'm going to start calling it X now. Say that maybe Lou Dort is now replaceable and that we should, put the brakes on the whole look at the Lou Dort Caruso backcourt defensive pairing. I hope that's not true.
Yeah.
You can't have enough of these guys. And Lou Dort's 3-point shot has become really solid, and he's proven it in the playoffs now that you have to respect him from beyond the arc. He's an incredibly valuable player who once looked like he might be a tad overpaid and now to me looks underpaid.
Y-
So I hope they hold on to all these guys because guys get hurt. You get a hotter shooter than another guy depending on the night. The Thunder are trying to win now. Caruso doesn't fill their number one need. I think their number one need is front court girth and rebounding
Yeah.
and just another front court look because Chet might be in a vacuum his best at the five. I think that's what makes Chet special. The rim protection combined with the offensive skills, the processing, the connectivity. But there are just certain looks where, especially just for the regular season, like having a Jonas Valanciunas next to Chet is really helpful. Eat some
hmm
minutes, etc. And in the playoffs, there are certain matchups where it might actually be really interesting to go to Chet at the four, especially as his 3-point shot becomes more and more reliable.
Yeah.
And so we've been looking a lot at centers in this draft, centers around the league. I know at the trade deadline, you and I were begging, and many others were begging for the Thunder to get, an Olynyk, a Gafford, one of those guys, a Tillman. They didn't. They still need to fill that need, I think, to get over the hump. And nobody in this draft is a better fit for the Thunder than UConn's Donovan Clingan. They got Caruso and they still have the assets to go get whoever they want. So maybe you trade up and go get Clingan, who I think is the most playoff ready drop coverage center in the league. I love the way he keeps offense moving. I love his quick thinking on offense. I think it's his most underrated skill. Zach Edey will almost definitely be available at 12. That's an option too. But I'm just really interested to see how the Thunder fill that more pressing need, even though this is an awesome move for OKC.
Yeah. No, there's increasing noise that Edie could go in the top 10, but
I think so too. I said most likely, but I,
yeah.
I, I agree. It's someone like the Grizzlies could bite it not. The Grizzlies are 8, I believe. Yeah. I think there was a long time where Memphis was really hoping that Klingon would fall to 8, and now it's looking like Klingon will definitely not be available at 8.
Yeah.
In which case, Edie with Jaren for the same reasons Edie with Chet, is interesting.
Yeah. And offensively, I don't think he takes anything away from them either. Career 38% 3-point shooter, and that's gotten a lot better in recent years. This past year, taking almost 5 a game, really upped his volume. That was like by far a career high for him. Shot 41% from three. So like teams aren't gonna guard him like, panic closeout when he catches it open on the perimeter, but he's a good enough shooter that he can make him pay. He's a tremendous cutter. He's really going to add that dimension to their team better than probably anyone who's on their team right now as far as cutting, and really good in transition too as a finisher. Really good connective player, connective passer. We saw that with the Lakers where he would make plays out of the short roll, just playing off of LeBron. And yeah, I think it's a slam dunk for them fit wise. I agree. I think they're already just based on their performance this past year in that like, you know, top tier of contenders that aren't quite like slam dunks, championship contenders. And if they can get themselves a big body of that sort, then I think they're slam dunk championship contenders, like on a level with Boston, just to be with their sort of versatility and overall skill level.
Nobody can bang with Jokic except maybe the Wolves at their very best. Let's go get SGA, Chet, and J Dub, their Aaron Gordon type
Yeah,
player, a
exactly.
power four. Hopefully, who doesn't take away from your spacing. Shooting at every position now is so important. But a guy who rebounds really well at the 4 or the 5. Because there were a lot of Thunder games this year where they had everything going except for the ability to consistently end possessions on the defensive glass.
Yeah. Another one I really like for them is Jonathan Mobo. I checked the pronunciation. That's the pronunciation.
Yes, sir.
Um,
Pogo Mobo.
yeah. Do you want to talk about the Giddey side of this at all?
Yeah, sure. I also just want to say before we move on to Chicago, Micah came on the pod right after the Thunder season ended, after the Dallas series, and he said an underrated spot they needed to figure out was point guard. And Caruso is one of the most selfless creators in the league
Mm-hmm.
who is so happy to take on a small offensive usage rate and just absolutely annoy the shit out of the other team's best perimeter threat. All right, let's talk about Chicago. I
Yeah.
really like the idea of a Giddey Kobe White backcourt. And just generally, I think without even getting into the details of his legal matter and the things that made this a really, really weird season for him, unless he's a complete psychopath, the stuff that was going on in the public eye had to have made it much harder for him to stay focused and play his best basketball. So, purely from a basketball perspective, Chicago probably feels like there's a lot of untapped greatness in this guy that they're bringing in now. How old is he? 22, I'm going to guess.
Yeah,
Just
he's not even 22.
right now, the concern is just that he really needs the ball in his hands to be the most effective version of himself.
Yeah. It's just there's not that many prototypes of really good offensive players who are not great ball handlers or great shooters. And he's like a functional ball handler, but he's not a good enough ball handler where he's gonna like beat people off the dribble or really punish you with dribble moves. Um, and then yeah, the shot just has been really slow to develop. Like the percentage is 34, which is okay, but all of them are like wide open, check the wind, daring you to shoot
Yeah.
type threes.
Kind of knuckleballs.
Yeah, 34% on those threes is not the same as 34% on like Duncan Robinson's crazy movement around two screens threes. Um,
I will say he hit a couple transition threes in the Pelicans series that were exciting. He's not a non-shooter. He's been through psychological hell this year, whether deserved or not. It just feels worse because he's going to Chicago.
yeah,
Like, if he was going to a young upstart team with a bunch of draft picks and a
yeah,
couple interesting young pieces, I think I'd be more excited about it. It's like
yeah,
now he's stuck in this weird roster where we don't quite even know what Chicago wants to do moving forward. I mean, like none of us would be shocked if DeRozan or Vucevic were traded on draft night. Like there's so many potential moving pieces for Chicago that I don't even know if they're planning to build around him, if they're going to
yeah,
reroute him. Like it's very unclear. But just Giddey as an asset in a vacuum, I think, is still very interesting. But we talked at the top about how Tatum, there are very few guys on the planet easier to build around than Jason Tatum. Giddey's kind of the antithesis of that. But there's a lot there. There's a lot there to build around. And if the right shooting coach gets his hands on Josh Giddey, like this guy could really be an all-star.
yeah. Well, he was with Chip England in OKC, and he did okay. But yeah, Gideon Kobe White is a exciting little backcourt offensively. Defensively, is another story, and is probably a bad one. The Bulls become interesting for just what are they going to do with the rest of their players from here. But having been to a live Bulls game this year, Bulls Suns, where Alex Caruso took Kevin Durant out of the game and led the Bulls in scoring and was just the best and most impactful player on the court, honestly, which included the Suns' big three. That's a really good player to get for OKC. And yeah, I'm probably not as high on Giddey as you are, but I do think I guess it's at least a flyer. And yeah, I really want to see what OKC does from here.
I'm not freakishly high on Giddey. I just know he still has a ton of talent. He's 21 years old. On the Caruso side, how many times in the last few years have we texted each other that he's top three, maybe one time in the last couple playoffs, top one guys that deserves to be in the playoffs and hasn't had a chance
Free
to
AC.
to bring all of the competitive magic that he brings to a cold Tuesday night in Milwaukee. I'm happy for him. And he just doesn't belong on the Bulls because the Bulls are not built to compete right now. Caruso's contract is soon expiring. So the Bulls have lost a lot of their leverage when it comes to the potential Caruso deals. And I think the fact that they got Giddey at this juncture is, pretty good turnaround. So I totally get it from both sides. But one
Yep.
thing's for sure, if Caruso's healthy, he's going to help the Thunder win playoff games.
Yeah.
Boris Dirk.